Hey, what's up, Liron here. Today we're gonna jump again straight into business. I want to talk to you about setting the tone, basically color, and how do you make a scene look a little more cohesive and have that sense of unity, which is really important. It's something that I sometimes struggle with and sometimes I feel like I'm nailing really well. So the basic principle I want to talk to you about is having that mother hue or mother color, as Alvaro Castanet calls it. I'm gonna just treat this as the tone or the temperature for the entire painting. And look at what I have here. So I have this beautiful scene, cityscape, and I'm gonna do an initial wash that's just basically almost exclusively one color. We will vary it and I'll show you how I do that. But I want to jump straight into it. I'm going to use Indian Yellow, and then I'm going to use Quinacridone Rose, and I'm going to use some French Ultramarine, okay? Now, let me mix something here, and notice how the mixing area was dirty. I'm perfectly fine with dirty mixing areas. In fact, I find that it leads to a more organic feel to the painting where things feel a little more interconnected. When you use simply exclusively pure colors throughout the entire thing, and especially in those first washes, it can look great, and it depends on the balance you're doing it, but I find that very often it can feel a little too detached. The colors may feel a little detached from one another, which is why I love mixing a bit of everything into everything. So I'm gonna get started with the sky, and this is predominantly yellow, right? Now it is still a muted gray yellow because the sky here seems a little gray. Now I'm gonna continue moving this along, but I'm gonna skip a few of the buildings and you'll see why in just a second, okay? I'm gonna continue moving this along here, and as I get to the buildings, I'm going to switch over to a bit of a pure yellow, still the same Indian yellow, okay? And it's not a huge difference by any stretch, but it is a bit of a difference, right? And I'm going to put these down with yellow, and look at what I'm going to do around the bottom. I'm actually going to add a bit more of that Quinacridone Rose to it, make things a little redder, okay? With barely any blue, because the blue is going to come in the next layer. But this stage, what we're doing right now, that is setting the tone for the entire painting. And if you can do that using one very clear color, you're done, you're good, you're gonna do a great job, okay? So what we're gonna do now, if you wanna lighten it up, by the way, a quick trick, if you feel like you've gone too dark, is to use a sprayer here. I think I'll give it just 1-2 sprays, 4 or 5, and see how it ends up looking. Let's allow this some time to dry, and then I'm going to show you how this one step we took connected everything together. So as you can see, everything is dry now. I did forget to mention, but I put probably a note. There is a scanned quality photo of this, so you can redraw it, of course, and follow along with me. Now, what we did here is, as I mentioned, set the tone. The scene itself, that beautiful kind of hazy effect, foggy late in the day time, which kind of leads to this strength of yellows. That's something really important in this example. And now we can move forward. Now, I'm not going to make this, we're done with the tutorial part in a way. I just want to show you how I take this over the edge to a somewhat of a complete painting, right? So I'm going to work on that mountain ridge first and create that beautiful perhaps negative shape around the building, but I'm going to keep things fairly light. Now I'm just going to open up, I have a couple of versions of the reference photo. I want to make sure that I'm looking at a few of them, and I will share this, of course, in a link. I have a posterized version as well, just to figure out like how strong is that contrast I'm working with. And we'll start with the blue. Now, what did I tell you about the colors being organic? It's not going to be just blue. It's going to be a mix. It's going to be kind of a gray blue, right? Grayish. But still, I want the blue to show enough and be dominant enough that it's actually the thing. It looks blue. And you can, of course, always use the test paper that I have here accessible and just see this and kind of guesstimate whether it will appear, blue enough or you need to add more. And don't forget you're glazing over another layer, right? So the blue will show a bit better. So I'm going to actually add a bunch of blue to this mix to save up on some mixing time. Now let me show you. I'm going to do something interesting here. I'm going to spray it just to lead to few soft edges. Now I'm going to spray it from afar all over. And that's fine because I'm just going to focus on the sky, and that will help me break off that smoothness of edge, right? So let's get started and see what we get here. So I'm putting this paint And now that I look at it, I want to make it a pure blue, right? I feel like it'll be a bit of a better, you see? Looks a little better in my opinion. And I'm going to work top to bottom as usual, even though you can work left to right in this particular instance. But because we put that yellow underneath, and this is really important, and let me spray some more water just to keep the edge moving. I'm going to spray from a bit closer, take a risk. Because I don't want it to seep too much into the buildings, but I do want some of it to flow. Because we're glazing over a yellow, we get this beautiful effect where you do see some of it, right? You see some of that yellow showing through, which is exactly what we're aiming for. Now, if you want to improve the cohesiveness, you can actually go ahead and connect this background with some of the shadows in the buildings. So we can do that. Let's see what happens. I wasn't planning on, but plans change, and this could be yet another stage in keeping things cohesive and having that sense of unity in the painting, you see? Because I'm doing yet another wash that covers up quite a lot of the painting. Not just the background and then the buildings and splitting everything up. These things do really help. Not only with the flow, which I do talk quite a lot about, right? The context of flow. Keep the shape moving, get a better flow in the painting, not just in that context, but also in the context of the color itself, and how the shape merged together leads to a more interesting color harmony, right? So we're kind of done with that mountain ridge. Now let's see what we're looking at in terms of shadows, right? I'm going to stop this wash here because this is a highlight and I don't want to go over it, but let's see where we can continue the blue, right? So we can definitely go over here, this area, connected to the shadow in this building, keep a few highlights for these, you know, poles, whatever it is, but look at how together this feels already, right? Just because we connected all of these colors. There's a shadow here. Now, you're doing your best here. You're not gonna, it's not gonna be perfect. You're doing your best to try and render the shapes you see, but when you're painting this small and this impressionistic, of course, the shapes are gonna be quite hinted at, suggested. Nothing is gonna be too perfect, which is fine. So I'm going to connect some cast shadows here, maybe a bit of a, you know, the roof is a little dark, but I'm actually going to keep it like that because I want to add a bit of red to it, right? Sorry if I'm talking fast, I'm just trying to cram in as much explanation as I can to this. This tower here, you know what, let's keep it light. I think we're pretty much done. So what I'm going to do in these as well, right, the shadows to the right of all of these poles, what I think I'll do is, in the spirit of keeping things connected, I'm just going to continue with this wash, but I'm going to vary it. So let's introduce into this blue a bit of my Quinacridone Rose and start shifting things towards a purpley gray. So we have this bluish gray here. Let's try and go for a bit of a more purpley gray around the bottom. I'm going to keep this gap of land that looks a little lighter. And we'll just kind of start rendering some random shadows. Now, you can't really, again, these are the stages that are hardest for me to explain. It's really hard to tell you exactly what I'm doing here, but I'm basically trying to create a feeling of a city. So I'm gonna fill in the areas while skipping some highlights, right? It's something you practice doing, you get better with time, but it's really hard to explain, so I'm just treating things as a bunch of abstract shapes, trying to establish, okay, this is a city, and there are buildings and rooftops and things that shine, you know. The one thing I will say is to try and keep things flowing while you're doing that, because if you're, and you see I'm introducing some more blue back into it, but the main thing is to keep this flowing. Why? Because you still want things to look, again, to preserve that sense of togetherness. So at the very least, keep some flow going, and I will look at it after we're done with the shape. Think about it. Do I want to make any more connections? I definitely want to make them. I'll tell you exactly where. Around here. That's a little too strong, but that's fine. Around here, I want to connect this. I want to connect that. Maybe a bit of a shadow here. Under the tower, there's an arch here. And then there's a shadow here. This is shadow. And then think to yourself, do I want to darken stuff? Wet and wet, because we're going to really finish this painting fast. So there are a few trees here. Let me add my mix of French ultramarine and Indian yellow, just to get these trees already in it. Here we have one tree that's fairly close, right? Get those wet and wet, keep them in the flow. So we're looking at a color that unites the painting, and then also the technique of keeping the flow going. There's a bunch of trees here. Sometimes you can get away with just yellow for the trees. So I'm going to put a bit of yellow there, wet and wet. And then maybe some rooftops. Maybe some of the rooftops are dark, so let me shift to red. And if I want to strengthen it, I can always add a bit of Parylene or a bit of even Pyrrole Scarlet. But for now, let's keep it fairly clean. I'll focus on the temperature. So let's say I want to get some darker rooftops here and there to hint at. Of course, some of the rooftops are catching the light, so it's what you see here. And then maybe you want to add a few blue dark sections like we did earlier. Just keep it interesting, right? Now, at this stage, all you really have to do is let it dry and kind of see where you're at. And there's going to be 2 more steps, probably. We're going to add a bit of stronger shadows on the buildings, and then we're going to add some details, right? And we may even do those together, wet and wet. So let's give it, allow it some time to dry, and then come back and continue. So here we go with that final wash. Everything is dried, and look at the magic here. I absolutely love how these basically buildings are connected with the background completely. Now, one thing to note, and I noticed this just from experience, once we make a separation by darkening them, some of the magic of that connection is going to get lost. So you want to just be mindful of, in this instance, I will darken everything just because it's a shadow and I feel like it's necessary, but you want to be mindful of, do I want to darken this completely? Maybe I want to leave some areas, you know, empty. You know, it is a matter of choice. You don't have to darken the way you see things in the reference photo necessarily. And I would encourage you to practice some, you know, artistic liberties, right? So I'm going to get started top to bottom. I'm using the very tip of my Escoda brush here just to get that tippy top. Now, here's what you have to understand. I'm going to render this thing top to bottom without stopping probably at all. Just being a little careful there with the small details. And I'm going to be doing quite a lot of wet and wet. By the way, sorry if you can hear that noise from the street. I will be doing quite a bit of wet and wet here. I'm getting rid of some of the water on the brush. There was a bit too much of it. For example, this dome is entirely darker, so I'm just going to darken it, the whole thing, right? But I have a lot of freedom in how I choose to do things. And one more suggestion I would give is work slow and steady and in small parts, because you may want to do some wet and wet, you may want to lift, you may want to do some corrections. You don't want to go too big, too fast, because then you will have maybe potentially a hard time controlling the paint, right? So, and I'm going to put in those windows and details and everything, and it looks quite dark, but actually it's going to dry a little lighter, as always. So, be aware of that, right? And as I keep moving this wash, it's time to start doing some wet and wets, right? To make this more interesting and more accurate and more loyal to the values that we see. Now you may not want to do, and I'm adding a bit of neutral tint to darken, you may not want to do wet and wet immediately. You may want to allow this a few more moments to start drying, because right now it's still quite wet and we'll just get, the paint's going to spread out everywhere. So here we go, we got that shape, and I'm actually going to darken this entire thing. I don't need that highlight there. And I can start doing those small details right here. You see my hand's a little shaky, it's not perfect lines, and it still looks good in my opinion. There's a lot of grace to it. Plus, you don't even have to put anything in the shadow, right? It's still a matter of choice. Now, I do want to put some details, so I will. As soon as this starts drying a bit, and you can always tilt the paper, look for the sheen, right? You see that? It means the paper is still quite wet. So I'll give it a few more seconds. Now, I am varying the color. So as I get to, for example, this triangular shape, which I love, I want to maybe bring some attention to it. So a bit more red, just to bring some more focus to this spot, right? That's again where artistic freedom kind of allows us to make these changes, right? And then there's a shadow here, and this all connects to one big happy shape. And I'm going to close it off here and add a bit of shadow to the statue there. But I'm basically going through a very similar process to what I did down here, of never losing sight of the full picture and always thinking, okay, will these details improve it, take away from it, you know, be too distracting? So let's do some wet and wet. This is still super wet, so we can give it some more time, just because it's a small shape, right? So let's put in this beautiful red rooftop here. You can use either a smaller brush or dab some of the water off of it like I'm doing here, just to manage that that wash, because otherwise you'll have tons of paint and just it's a big mess. Now there are these weird arches that you often find in these types of structures. I'm going to draw them just because they look super good, and I completely forgot in the previous stage to do that, and that will give it its very authentic. I'm not even sure where that is now that I think about it. Is that Florence? I think so, but I mean, I would guess that it's Florence, but I can check probably the name of the photo. The name of the photo is Cathedral, so that doesn't help us a lot. Now I'm gonna lighten things up here on that other part of the cathedral. So we're just gonna keep this wash fairly simple and kind of light, just to have a balance and pull more attention to here, right? Now again, tilt this to see the sheen. This actually looks like it's starting to dry up top here, so maybe in just a few more moments we will begin to, you know, add some more details there. But you're not only darkening, you're also controlling the color, saturation, focus, and everything. So by using different colors, you can further dictate how you're gonna direct the viewer's attention, right? Now there's this beautiful tower. I'm gonna add a bit more blue to that and just get this top of the tower done with a bit of that cross or bell or whatever. And it has quite a few windows in it, which I love to portray. These arched windows, of course, we can't get every single detail in. But at this stage, really, the painting is pretty much done. You know, what we're doing here is just small decorations. It was done the moment we finished the previous wash, you know. I think as soon as I would add these, here's some shadows on the dented windows in the walls. But honestly, as soon as I'll add some of the wet and wet details, we're done. So let's do that here. A bit of a shadow there. Now it's starting to properly behave based on how it's starting to dry. Bit of a detail there. These pretty prominent windows here, I do want to, I just don't have enough flow. So let me wet this a bit to get some movement, and now we'll be able to take out more paint, because I need some very thick paint here. You could use it straight out of the tube if you have a tube right next to you, but I don't want to take it out of the drawer at the moment. There we go. Maybe you can add a line indicating, you know, the structure. A bit of an internal shadow in some of the windows, that could definitely work. Some small architectural details, maybe the window here if it's not too wet still. But I think I'm gonna be calling this one done. What I'm doing now is just small kind of enhancements and adding just a bit of, you know, touches here and there to give the viewer something else to look at. Let's actually sign this. I think we're good. I'm gonna sign with my white gel pen just because it's fun sometimes. Here, let's use this corner. I wanted this to be very digestible process, nothing too long, fancy, complicated. And I'm gonna dry this real fast and we'll remove the tape. Okay, actually one more thing I was kind of missing here is just a few more details in the foreground. I initially wanted to leave it like that, but when I look at it again, I think just a few windows here and there would make a big difference in getting this to look more like a cityscape, which it already does look like. It's not a must. This is completely optional. In fact, everything is optional. Painting is optional. You know, you do whatever you want. But just a few of these here and there to indicate there are some structures that can really go a long way. You can add sometimes I like to add shadows under highlights. I just find that it looks good. Don't want to make them too prominent, but here and there they can, you know, everything in the right ratio can look really, really good. But that's really the touch I was talking about. That's nothing else. So let's zoom in. And as we don't really need everything else around it, we can start removing the tape. And hopefully you'll create a beautiful impression. But let me take you back to those first initial stages and words that I was sharing with you. That setting the tone, first wash, having just one color, maybe mixed in with a few other colors very gently. So for me it was yellow with a bit of red. And of course, keeping things kind of intermixed. So my yellow has a bit of red and a bit of blue, and my blue has a bit of red and a bit of yellow. Everything has a bit of the rest of the colors. But for that first wash, feel free to cover the entire thing up. It's gonna remove a lot of pressure that you may feel because of, you know, the blank page syndrome. It will just get rid of that stage for you, and it will set the tone for the entire scene. You really cannot, and I can't emphasize this enough, you can't mess it up too badly when it comes to tones and atmosphere if you first do this, right? Now, one more note as we finish this. A lot of people have the tendency to go too light on that wash. You saw how it looked pretty strong when I first put it. Don't go tea, because then it just won't be noticeable enough, right? Unless you do multiple tea glazes, but try and go a little beyond that. Be a little courageous and go beyond just the tea consistency, and I think it will look really, really good. But with that, I will thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like. It helps the video reach more people. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if this is the first video you discover me by, and let me know in the comment down below what else you want to see. I do have a watercolor course you can check out in the description box if you want to let go, enjoy the painting process, and paint freely. Also a drawing course. Check out the links, description box below. I will see you again in another video real soon.